I did this presentation in London the other day, and I think the thing that struck me the most is that the only people that benefit from all this technology is us, because there's so much choice now. And certainly cost is not the barrier to entry for anybody in this room, because you can buy a camera costing, what, 595 quid, or if you were in the summer, the £395 special on the Blackmagic Pocket camera, or you can spend in excess of 25 grand and above if you want to. So interestingly, the cost of the handle on top of the Red Epic is more money than a Blackmagic Pocket camera. So that kind of is quite an interesting statistic, I think. So when the guys from the tour asked me to do this presentation, I was a bit stuck because, you know, it's quite a position of responsibility. What cameras do you think you should be looking to buy in 2015? And the thing is, I can't answer that question for you at all, because I have no idea what you shoot, what your budget is, what you're going to be using them for. So I thought, well, what's the best way to go about this? So I run a company called F-Stop Academy, and we have about 3,000 students. We've got about 8,000 people on our email list. So I decided to send a survey out to them to ask them the question, well, what are you using at the minute? How much money have you spent on gear to now? What kind of factors are important to you when choosing a camera? Because I thought, well, rather than me try and kind of predict what that might be, I'm going to ask a load of people. So in a space of about 24 hours, I sent a 9-question survey out to my database, and we got 264 responses. And at that point, I felt that anything over 100 is a big enough number to be representational of the market as a whole. And my audience is worldwide, so the general criteria that I sort of went by was a sub £10,000 category, so sort of entry-level production, although in actual fact you can get a lot more for that goes beyond just entry level, but that's the kind of category we're going to call it. And it has to be location capable, so I didn't include studio cameras and all that kind of thing. Hopefully you can read this, if not I'll read it out. So the first question was, what best describes your filmmaking? And I'm sure, hopefully you can all identify with one of these. So the first one was enthusiast, amateur, serious hobbyist, earns no money from filmmaking. We had 32 respondents, so that's about 12% of the audience. Stepping up to double that was the part-time filmmaker, someone who earns some money from filmmaking, but it's still a kind of a part-time hobby. And there was quite a lot of people in that category. We had 64 people, or 24%. Next up, we had runs a small business, primarily focusing on video, and that's the primary revenue stream for the business. So 21%, 21.3% there, 56 filmmakers. And then we had freelance technicians, you know, someone who gets paid for turning up and shooting or editing or operating sound. And that was 14%. And then 12.5% staff filmmakers, media professionals, you know, either working in a university, a college, or providing video services in an organization. And then 15.5%, 41 people who were regarding themselves as experienced video producers, running successful video production companies, where they're not just scraping a living, but they're actually making a good living from it. I just like this diagram, I thought it looked quite cool. What was interesting was that the part-time filmmaker, amateur, and runs a small business certainly was about, what's that, 21, 35, 40, over 40% of the audience were hobbyists, just starting out, you know, part-time filmmakers, and already running small companies. And I think that's a massive shift from even 5 years ago. So what's happened is a lot of new filmmaking blood came into the industry and is now starting to want to make money from it. And I think that's a good thing, because there's actually plenty of opportunities to make money with it. So I couldn't really do an event like this without touching on cost, because it's usually the first question that comes out of anyone's mouth. How much is it? How much is it? How much is it? And for a while I thought, well, this is going to be a really budget conscious market. They're actually going to be really kind of looking for the best deals all the time. And not the case. So I'll run you through this. I had various sort of budget areas. I did it all in dollars because a lot of my audience is American. But the rest of the world can seem to convert to dollars very easily, but you give people in the States pound sterling and they just freaks them out, think it's some sort of foreign language. So I've converted it here, just based on a couple of days ago, the exchange was about 1.6. And so we had between 0 and £1,200, 1,200 to £3,000, £3,000 to £6,000, £6,000 to £9,000, £9,000 to £12,000, £12,000 to £18,000, and above £18,000. And that's money you've spent to date on video equipment. And I made it clear that in the survey brackets, it was like, excluding post-production. It was just production equipment. And it was quite a staggering amount of money, actually. So only 7% of the entire market bought the cheapest price and had spent under £1,200. At the other end, 49 respondents, which was almost, there's the £5,000 to £10,000 bracket, or the $5,000 to $10,000 bracket, £3,000 to £6,000 were 50 people, but there were 49 people who'd spent in excess of £18,000 on gear. That adds up to, taking the conservative estimates, over £2 million on gear between 256 filmmakers. So clearly money is not the deciding factor when buying equipment. I then wanted to try and understand, well, what are the current brands that are owned by this sector of the community? And I carried out this survey a week ago exactly. So it's pretty representative of a broad range of filmmakers. By a long way, Canon DSLRs were the predominant camera that was owned. But one thing we discovered, because there was a lot of comments as well, which are not part of the presentation here, and a lot of the comments were, well, I own 2 or 3 cameras, so I might own 2 or 3 DSLRs. So at the current state of play, Canon DSLR is a large portion. In fact, I'll take the next slide, which goes into the numbers. 62% of people surveyed own Canon DSLRs. And then another 18% own Canon large sensor, and another 10% Canon small sensor. So clearly Canon have had a very, very big hold on the market up until this point. Sony DSLRs down at 8%. Sony large sensor, not a bad 22%. Sony small sensor, 22%. So clearly there's still a big enough market for the small sensor 3-chip cameras with a fixed lens, as well as this fashion for larger sensor camcorders. Panasonic are in there with 6.8%, large sensor, 18% small sensor. So Sony and Panasonic holding kind of their own in the small sensor market. And then we've got Blackmagic Cinema, 2.5K at 6%, production camera at 3%, and Blackmagic Pocket at 11%. So let's just look a little bit at some of the offerings sub £10,000 for each of the manufacturers. Again, I was curious, because I'm pretty much a Sony shooter. That's kind of what I do. I've used lots of other cameras, but I tend to veer towards Sony. I've got Canon gear as well and Blackmagic, but that's what I grew up on. I think a lot of us end up working with formats that we grew up on. So if you started working with a Panasonic camera or a Canon camera early in your career, then it's more likely you're still going to be shooting on them today. So in terms of Sony's range, starting at the A7S, which is their full-frame sort of mirrorless camera. Then you go up to the PXW-X70, which is a 10-bit 422 1-inch single-chip camera. Then the PXW-X180, which is their 3-chip XD cam camera. And then the FS7, which is, again, they're all singing, all dancing, super 35mm 4K 1080p camera with high frame rates. And then just creeping in was the F5 at sort of just under £10,000. So, each manufacturer's got a range of tools to suit the type of filmmaking you might want to do. On to JVC next. Always had a very strong legacy in education. The GY HM850, that's kind of an incarnation of their 650, and they've gone for that sort of Fujinon lens, decent zoom lens on it, very, very high functionality, small sensor. They've got the 6001 and the 650, again, smaller, compact, small sensor camcorders, which clearly still have a place in events, corporate videos, even weddings, that kind of thing. The GY HM150, again, a nice compact handheld camera, and all the manufacturers seem to have a solution, so that's, I guess, their answer to the PXWX70, and Panasonic have an equivalent as well. But they're, interestingly, now entering the large sensor market, which is a real step change for them, and something they've stepped into. Now, they did get into 4K. They were the first company to have a compact 4K camera a couple of years ago at NAB. And I used it, and it was interesting. It was unfortunate at the time you had to use 4 different SD cards, and that became a kind of bit of a faff. But they've moved on, and the LS300 now is their 4K super 35mm sensor. And slightly confusing, it's a super 35mm sensor, but with a micro four thirds lens mount. That's due to be out, hopefully, I believe, in January. I don't have a price point on that yet, but they are here today if you want to talk to them about that. So again, JVC have got a range of small, compact, small sensor camcorders up to a super 35mm solution. Blackmagic, very disruptive company, but for all the right reasons. Here's a company that had a traditional foothold, a traditional stronghold in post-production and making post-production affordable and accessible to everyone in this room. I mean, I would not be standing here today with a production company with a full 4K editing and grading suite in essentially a shed at the end of my garden offering out 4K grading, were it not for companies like Blackmagic. So boutique companies like I run can then compete on a bigger stage, offer full production facilities at a fraction of the price because I don't have the overheads of being in a fancy office in the middle of the city. Obviously, the 2.5K cinema camera was the first camera that came out. Maybe not everyone's cup of tea for ergonomics, but the pictures are outstanding. And it's very, very affordable. And of course, there are ways to build the camera up and make it more ergonomic to suit your needs. The pocket camera we touched on earlier, I mean, the price that is, it's hard to kind of ignore it, to just have it in your kit bag for, probably with a lens under £1,000. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. And then 4K, of course, the production camera. Again, a very affordable way to shoot high-quality 12-bit RAW and ProRes. 4K onto very affordable SSDs. And then the Ursa, which I just believe has just started shipping. And again, not everyone's cup of tea for every application. It's certainly not a camera you would run around doing a documentary with. But if you consider doing something more set piece, maybe a music video, maybe a corporate, maybe a drama, maybe anything that has more production value, and you're running a crew, then again, it's a very, very affordable entry point into 4K production with a lot of interesting benefits, with a large screen and easy accessibility. And then again, those guys are out the front today, so you've got an opportunity to go and get hands on the gear. Canon, of course, who had a very strong hold, and probably still do, at this current moment in time with the existing customer base that's replied to the survey, have a range of gear. And it's not all here, but starting with the DSLR, I mean, that's what built our company, F-Stop Academy. Philip and I went out and made some tutorials on the 5D Mark II and the 7D, and it built the company. So the DSLR is still a prominent piece of gear. Just out of interest, who's still got a DSLR and shoots video on it? Show of hands. Okay, so not as many as I would have thought. But it's still a very affordable tool to have in your kit bag. And then we got to the XF105 and the XF305. Again, their answers to the sort of compact handheld camcorders that allow you to just have that extra angle. And then we've got, of course, the C100 Mark II just been released. I'm a big fan of the C100. I think it's a lovely camera. It's every bit a C300 without the MXF 50 megabits. And of course, throw an Atomos on there on a C100 and you've basically got a broadcast-ready C300. Very, very popular camera. They've made some really nice improvements to this one. It's got an articulating screen now, and they've increased the slow motion up to 1080p. And of course, the C300 been a very, very important camera for Canon. Anyone working in broadcast has probably either got one or used one. But what's interesting about this whole market is it never stays still for very long. And what I would say is, while there's always new technology coming out, there's nothing wrong with these cameras. I mean, if you're you probably pick up a C100 now really cheap, or even a C300 as the newer cameras from Sony and other manufacturers come into play. They're never, I always make this reference back to the FS100, which was the kind of first real large sensor camcorder to come off the back of the DSLR thing. And myself and James Tonkin and Mick Jones all still love that camera, you know. I mean, James Tonkin, who I do a lot of work with, shot the Coldplay tour on an FS100, you know. None of these cameras stop being great just because a newer one comes out with more bells and whistles. And then Panasonic, last but by no means least. I mean, they haven't really done much with their Micro Four Thirds camcorder since the AF101. But I was speaking to someone last week who just shot a fairly high-budget documentary for Al Jazeera on an AF100 or AF101, and an Atomos Samurai or Ninja. So, you know, companies like Atomos making really affordable recorders with great monitoring and the likes kind of breathe new life into a lot of formats. The GH4, of course, has been a very popular camera. Back a few years ago when I did the Revenge of the Great Camera shootout with Rizakuto in Chicago, the GH4 came out very, very well. It's like the GH3 at the time came out on top in a lot of tests. And I saw someone recently doing a test comparing the GH4 to the Red Epic. And it was like, you know, in that particular scenario of him sat at his desk, side by side, you couldn't tell them apart. So I think what I want to try and kind of pass across is that it doesn't really matter what camera you have and what you buy if you know how to light, frame, tell a story, because all of the technology is now good enough. And all of the manufacturers have a small sensor camera, a large sensor camera, a more production camera. So there really comes down to, you know, what do you want to do? What do you want to spend? Because all of the manufacturers have got something that will fill each gap. Then you've got the AC160 and the AC90, which again are very, very affordable camcorders. And actually Jill over at Holden there has got the HCX1000 on demo here. It's the first one in the UK, I believe. And it's a very, very affordable 4K camera. So this whole 4K thing keeps creeping up. And I'll come back to that a bit later, because at the beginning of this year, I couldn't have cared less about 4K. I really couldn't. Then having made the FS7 launch film in Japan in 4K, and then the A7S launch films, I was kind of sort of transformed overnight. And interestingly, the survey reveals some quite interesting numbers there as well. So the next question I wanted to ask was, how important is form factor? You know, I'm not the greatest fan of rigs. I prefer to just pick a camera up and be able to stick it on my shoulder and use it. But I wanted to kind of get a sense of how important were rigs and that flexibility for the filmmakers that we work with. So the questions were, I hate rigs, prefer to shoot naked, don't mind rigs, gives me some flexibility, and not fussed either way. And again, the not fussed either way and the flexibility seem to amount to about 80% of the vote. So we had 49 people saying they just weren't interested in shooting with rigs at all, and then pretty even stats on, yeah, don't mind the rigs and not fussed either way. So rigs clearly still have a place. And this is an example of a new set of rigs that Zacuto have made. And what's interesting about this is they've actually gone for something that is as universal as can possibly be. Now, it might look a little bit cumbersome, but one of the things that Steve and Jens have done, and they're good friends of mine, so full disclosure, is that they've spent a lot of time working with people like me and Mick and all the other filmmakers they work with, including Rodney Charters and Bruce Logan, about getting the center of gravity right, getting the balance right. Because I come from a background of shooting Betacam SP and Digibeta and HD Cam, where you've got a V-lock on the back, the camera sits on your shoulder, you sit with your hand on the lens, and what you get is a nice balance. So you move around and everything's nicely balanced. It's not front heavy, it's not back heavy. Most of the new technology is much, much lighter and has lower power consumption and smaller batteries than the old Betacams. And so to get the balance right, you end up always having a front-heavy camera. So the lenses are always front-heavy, and to get a rig to balance properly, the camera needs to be much further back on your shoulder. And what they've done with these is they've created a universal VCT14 style shoulder pad that is completely movable, so you can get the camera right back to where you need it to be, and the camera will balance much better on your shoulder. And they've got a new graphical EVF, OLED EVF. And so one of the things that we discovered in this survey is that a lot of you have more than one camera. I mean, a show of hands on them. Who's just got one camera? Hands up. Who's got 2 cameras? 3 cameras? 4 cameras? So average 2 to 3 cameras each. So what this system allows you to do is have one rig that's universal across all the cameras you use. And this OLED graphical EVF is simply stunning. It's very bright, it's got great resolution. And so what you can do is end up with this kind of consistency between the rig that's on your shoulder and what you're seeing in the viewfinder, and all you change out is like the digital back on the camera. So it's very much worth checking these out. There's a little GIF there on various cameras, the Scion, the Alexa, C5, the Red Epic, DSLR, C300, Blackmagic. So you can see that the position of the actual body of the camera changes depending on the balance of the camera. But it's an interesting approach, and one I think will be very popular. And the ability to slot it onto a VCT14 plate, you're just not going to be faffing about quite as much. So it's definitely worth having a look at them. So, based on the survey, I wanted to kind of figure out what were the trends going forward. So we know we've talked about what's happened in the past and how much money's been spent and who's leading the market there. And this is where it got very, very interesting. Now, I apologize, it's probably not that easy to read. So I'll read it out for you. In terms of if you're in the market for a new camera in the next 12 months and you were leaning towards one camera, what would it be? And this is the point where Robbie Fleming from Sony sits back and relaxes and smiles because his work is done. It seems to be that based on my survey of a week ago, 40%, 103 people would go and buy an FS7 tomorrow, which I thought was quite staggering. So the shift has gone from Canon dominating with DSLRs to suddenly Sony are very much back in the game. Sony A7S, 24%, 63. So that's 166 people would go out of 264 and buy a Sony A7S and or an FS7 tomorrow. The X70, we got 10 there. X180, 11, Sony F5 or F55, 17, Canon DSLRs right down to 17. Now, I'm not surprised by that because there is no real need anymore to shoot video on DSLRs unless you have a very specific reason to do so. Not knocking them at all. They help build my business. How can I possibly knock a DSLR? But we've moved on. The technology has moved on. We no longer need to faff around with boxes on the DSLR to get audio input, multiple different connectors, multiple batteries, and multiple points of failure that just give you more stress when you're on location. So very much the shift is towards, you know, purpose-built large sensor camcorders. Canon DSLR, we got 17 there. C100 Mark II, 42, so Canon's still got a strong support network there. C300, 32, Canon XF series, 8. Panasonic GH4, 15% looking at that. So again, still, I think that camera is still performing very, very well because the images are fantastic and it's a lot of bang for the buck. I think it's just a little bit over £1,000 and you get a 4K camera. So it's really quite, you know, it's still very much a camera that's worth looking at. And, you know, as I said, you know, hats off. I'm very much a Sony guy. I'm not going to pretend I'm somehow agnostic to everything because none of us are. We have our favorites. But I say to people, you know, buy an A7S and a GH4. Have both, you know, because they're still so cheap. In fact, you could buy an A7S, a Shogun, and a GH4 and still have change from £5,000. Now, 5 years ago, what would £5,000 buy you? You couldn't even get an EX3, you know. Then we've got Blackmagic, the cinema camera. We've got 4 there. Well, that's not surprising because we've got the production camera out now, 24. This pocket cinema camera, 6. The Blackmagic Ursa, 19. So again, similarly good number. So at the same kind of number that are buying Canon DSLRs or an F5 or F55 are also going to look at the Ursa. Just Scion, not something I know much about, but that's got 10 people interested in that. 6 would look at buying the Red Epic. 11 would look to buy the Red Epic Dragon. And 5 in the Red Scarlet. So quite an interesting mix there. And I was quite surprised at just how things are shifting, which just goes to show that none of us have any loyalty to a manufacturer. And that's fair enough because why should we? We are the buyers. It's a buyer's market. There are more tools possibly that we could ever hope to use. So really the only choice is which ones do we prefer? This was something that I found very interesting. How many people in the room are interested in 4K? Yeah, it's not bad. Well, this is the one that really surprised me, because I wasn't sure if 4K was just a bit of a, you know, cynically manufacturers trying to sell tellies, and it probably is to a degree, and certainly that's how changes in formats have always been driven. From 4:3 to 16:9 was because tellies went from 4:3 to 16:9, from SD to HD, and now we're HD to 4K. And I believe that the EBU are looking at all sorts of things to do with 4K transmission, extended dynamic range. So 4K isn't just about 4 times more resolution, which is why cameras that I'm familiar with, like the FS7, are 14 stops of dynamic range and S-Log3, because it's not just about the resolution, it's about the dynamic range and the resolution and the ability to do, you know, off-speed recording and that kind of thing. And these were quite interesting results. So the questions again were, you know, I have no interest in 4K. I'm maybe mildly interested in 4K, thinking about it, and yes, totally into 4K. And again, really interesting results that between, you know, mildly interested, thinking about it, and yes, totally into it, 95% of the audience were basically saying, yeah, 4K is something we need to be looking into. And I think that's a big shift from even 12 months ago. So clearly 4K is gathering more momentum, far more than 3D ever did. And having used 4K, it's cool. I really like it. It sort of challenges you. You've got you know, real critical focus issues to contend with. You've got to light slightly differently. You've got to move the camera slightly differently. You've got to use better glass. So I think it sort of forces us up the quality threshold quite significantly. But equally, you can buy a 4K camera for a couple of grand that's got, you know, built-in lens. So, and even, you know, 4K GoPros. I mean, there's plenty of 4K happening, and clearly something that is of great interest to the market as a whole. So what kind of 4K options do we have? Well, here's just a kind of cross-section. So we'll start with the A7S and the Atomos Shogun. We've got Atomos Shoguns here today working. The next presentation I'm doing here is for Sony. We're going to have one on stage. Then we've got some solutions here. We've got the 4K production camera. So the only downside, if you like, if that's how you want to look at it, with the A7S and the Shogun is you've got to have a separate recorder. But having shot 4K, and I can tell you from personal experience, I've messed up a bit of 4K, you want a nice big screen, because you cannot focus and frame properly on a small screen when you're shooting 4K. So actually, the Shogun gives you that nice big 7.5-inch screen, and it allows you to see focus. You can pixel map 1-to-1 pixel. You can see your exposure tools. So definitely have a play with that today if you can. 4K production camera, again, Blackmagic's sort of, you know, handheld size camera. Again, shoots on SSDs, very affordable media. And yes, you need to kind of plug some accessories on that to get it working to your full potential if you want, but you can shoot it with it out the bag like that. GH4, again, its big strength is its internal 4K recording. And, you know, so if you want something small that you can run and gun with, that's a solution. And of course, Canon had its EOS 1DC, which is still available, shoots 4K. So again, each of the manufacturers in this sort of form are giving you a 4K option. Taking a brief look at some of the camcorders, you've got the HCX 1000, which is just over there by Holden. Again, 4K, very affordable. I think it's a couple of grand, something like that. It's not terribly expensive. The LS300, which is JVC's new super 35mm small form factor 4K camera. And then, of course, the PXW FS7, which is over there. Johnny Preston's got one there. Promotion have got one. I know there's one around the corner at Guy with higher camera there. So there's plenty of chance to get hands-on with them today. And then going up the scale to a slightly larger form factor. So if you're going to start going into projects where you're going to have bigger lenses, you're going to have crew hanging off the camera, monitors, PL glass, maybe, you know, wireless follow focus units, then you might be looking at more of a kind of production camera. And the F5 is kind of in here just by the skin of its teeth, because at the moment it's not 4K, but it will be having a 4K upgrade in December. So I think it's worth having in here. The Adjust Scion, I'm not sure what price point that's coming in at, or if it's when it's due to be available, but again, another choice if that's what you want to look at. And of course the Blackmagic Design Ursa, which I think is something also worth looking at. I wanted to find out how important RAW was. And again, the results were this. First question was, how important is workflow? And the first answer was, I want to shoot RAW for maximum flexibility and don't mind the data overhead. Next one was, I want compressed, efficient codecs that maximize quality at a small file size. I only want to shoot ProRes, in the orange there. The grey is, I like the option to shoot compressed and or RAW if I choose. And then 22 people there not really fussed. So in terms of numbers, there was 11% really wanted to shoot RAW and didn't mind the extra data overhead that brings. 66 people saying, I want compressed, efficient codecs that maximize quality at a small file size, which is what great compression does. It tries to balances, quality without losing too much. 22 people only want to shoot ProRes, which means they're probably still working on Final Cut 7, I would imagine. And 159 people like the option to shoot compressed and or RAW if they choose, which puts them in kind of a bracket of either buying a Blackmagic camera, or I suspect what's skewing this result slightly is the large number of DSLR owners who are hacking their cameras to get RAW output to improve the quality of the signal. My prediction is that actually good compressed formats will start to take over from wanting to shoot RAW, because the data overhead for RAW is a nightmare. And I don't know many people who make a living from filmmaking who actually choose to shoot RAW, which is why things like XAVC, the interframe codecs, are so good, because they compress very, very efficiently, where you get high data rates with fairly lossless compression. And again, I just thought it was important, this whole idea of external recorders. Now we've got Atomos here, but we could also include Convergent Design in that. I don't know if Adja are still doing external recorders. I think certainly Atomos and Convergent Design seem to have the edge there. Convergent Design have done very well with things like the FS700, taking raw outputs from the FS700 into the Odyssey 7Q. Again, a fairly affordable monitor come recorder solution. But Atomos here, 30 people here can't live without them. 30 people can't live without them. 160 people can definitely see the value and might consider one. Which is 60%, not really interested in hanging stuff off the camera, another 16%, 43 people there, and then 31 happy with internal recording. So again, seems to be a trend towards the affordability of these recorders, the advantage giving you an extra screen. The screens have improved dramatically on the Atomos recorders in the last couple of years. You've got great exposure tools. It's easy to play stuff back. And I know a lot of people who've got like C100s who just automatically bolt an Atomos recorder on there. You can bolt on Atomos recorders onto these, these drones that John will be talking about later on. So, they're a really nice solution that can just sit in your camera bag, work off your DSLR, work off pretty much any camera you've got, and record straight to ProRes if you want to kind of have that workflow. So what are our conclusions based on this survey and where to spend money in 2015? Well, I mean, these are just my observations. Clearly, cost is not the defining factor when a cross-section of 256 filmmakers, which is probably about the number of filmmakers in this room today, have already spent in excess of £2 million. And that figure just staggered me. But actually, when you add up 60 people spending 20 grand and another 40 people spending 10 grand, it adds up. So no one's really buying on price. 6% of the audience are buying because it's cheap. Everyone else is buying because they want functionality and other quality. 4K is clearly gaining ground very, very quickly. And I think that can only be a good thing, because it means we can, in the most simple terms, you can record an interview in 4K, stick it on a 1080p timeline, and have a wide shot and a mid shot without having to change camera position. So that makes our life more efficient. You've got a single camera with 2 angles. Raw options are perceived to add value, but I'm fairly comfortable that the reason that's such a high number is because a lot of the DSLR owners are, hacking their camera to get RAW, because RAW out of a DSLR is far superior to compressed on a DSLR. External recorders are very popular and seem to be a bit of a no-brainer, because they're priced at such a point where you're basically getting a monitor, so why wouldn't you? But traditional camcorders are still relevant, and that's why all the manufacturers still have a small sensor, compact camcorder with a fixed zoom lens of 17 times or 25 times, where you can plug your radio mics in and run around, I guess, making observational documentaries if you want to. So that was my conclusions. I'm just going to finish up by telling you about my book. I've just finished writing a book called Business for Filmmakers, because all of this stuff comes down to earning money at some point. Now, excluding if you're just a hobbyist. But the survey seemed to suggest that about 80% of people in the room, or in the survey, were interested in making some sort of money from this. So I started my company 5 years ago. We now do multiple six figures a year in turnover. And we've learned how that works. There's a process, there's a system, how to quote, how to charge, how to break down the costs involved in production, how to present that to a client, so when they say how much, you don't tell them the price, you engage them in conversation. And you understand, you try and find out more and more about what their needs are. Because 6% of the population, only 6% of the population buy on price. So if someone's phoning you up and you're asking you for a price, you need to do some work to build a relationship with them. And you can do that in a half-hour phone call. So it's 208 pages. Business of Filmmakers, the quick, dirty, and uncensored secrets to a six-figure video business from the world's ballsiest filmmaker. That's me. Ballsiest because I don't give a shit what anyone thinks. And I don't say that to be arrogant. It's like neither should you. You should only care about what your customers think. There's so much noise on the internet about what you should do, what you should buy, how you should shoot, blah, blah, blah. The only people you should listen to are the people paying you. And this book will teach you exactly how to run a six-figure business. Also got a couple of hands-on workshops in December. 8th and 9th at Stansted at the Radisson Blu. It's a 2-day lighting workshop, hands-on about really how to light very quickly in any situation. And then the 10th to 12th, we're running a 3-day cinematic documentary intensive with only 6 filmmakers. And that is basically, we go out and we shoot a mini doc in 3 days. We conceive it, we shoot it, we light it. We use multiple cameras, so whatever people turn up with the workshop, we basically shoot with. We cut it, we grade it, and then we match all the cameras in the grade, and then you walk away with a film for your showreel. So if you're interested in any of them, the workshops are available at fstopacademy.com. There's also a ton of free resources at fstopacademy.com. If you get on my email list, send you a bunch of emails, then I send you daily emails on filmmaking technique, anecdotal stories, and the likes. And if you're interested in the book, that'll be on sale in a couple of weeks. It's £19.97, and it's businessforfilmmakers.com. I've been Lennie. Thank you very much for listening. You've been very quiet, and I'm here all day, so if you want to ask a question, please feel free to. Thank you very much.